I demand that you be taken into custody immediately. This land belongs to the HOA. This Karen picked up the phone and dialed 911 on me simply for using a lakeside shortcut that my family has used for generations. She was ranting about trespassing and declining property values, as if I were committing a crime when in reality, I was just heading home from work. What this self-important HOA queen didn't anticipate was that by calling the police, she was triggering a chain of events she could never have imagined. Let's just say, some people have protections that go far beyond what suburban Karens are used to. Her overly dramatic 911 call was about to blow up in a way that would spread like wildfire across the internet. And drama-nest viewers, drop your country in the comments. This Karen's about to find out exactly why you should do a little research before dialing emergency services. You ever have one of those days when you're just trying to get home from work, following the same trail your family's used for over 100 years, and suddenly you're face to face with neighborhood tyranny? That was my Tuesday. My name's Alex Riverong, 34 years old. I'm a carpenter by trade, and I've been taking this lakeside path to our family's cabin since before I could even reach the doorknob. That cabin has been part of our lives since 1897. My great-grandfather built it himself, carving our last name into a wooden sign that stood strong through more storms than I could count. But that particular Tuesday, I was walking back with my drone kit. I'd been capturing erosion footage for an environmental reporter when something made my pulse spike like caffeine on an empty stomach. Somebody had vandalized our family sign, Riverong Family Estate. 1897 was now coated in glaring white paint that read, "Private property HOA only." Now, I'm not quick to anger, but seeing over a century of family legacy erased like that, that was personal. I stood there for a second, running my fingers over the old carvings still faintly visible beneath the paint. I could almost hear my great-grandfather's voice in my head. "Son, sometimes you don't choose the battle chooses you." That's when she showed up. Picture this, a woman in her late 40s exploding out of a hedge like some kind of suburban commando. She had a clipboard that looked like it held nuclear launch codes, a contractor-grade tape measure, a phone clutched like a lifeline, and a believe it or not a whistle on a lanyard swinging like she was about to referee a soccer game. Meet Brittany Blackwood, HOA president and self-appointed enforcer of property values. Wearing a blazer that probably cost more than most folks' monthly rent, she strutted like she owned everything from the sidewalk to the sky. "Excuse me," she barked, storming toward me like a military commander. "Do you have authorization to be here?" The way she said authorization, you'd think I was asking for access to a restricted military base. I glanced up from the freshly painted sign and responded calmly, because I already knew this was going to be one for the books. "Authorization from who, exactly?" Her eyes went wide like I just asked her to translate ancient Greek. "From me. I am the HOA president. I'm the authority here." Her voice was climbing pitch by the second, like a soprano in the middle of a suburban opera. I pulled out my phone and hit record, not to provoke her, but because I had a gut feeling I was going to need evidence of this encounter. "Authority based on what, ma'am?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. You could almost see the steam hissing out of her ears. "This is private property. You're trespassing," she snapped, waving her clipboard like it was some kind of magical document that could erase me from the neighborhood. At that point, I figured I might as well enjoy myself. I started setting up my drone for launch. Now, I've seen people lose their composure, but Brittany Blackwood took the concept to a whole new level. "That's illegal surveillance. You're stalking me." "Harassment," she yelled, practically bouncing on her heels, flailing her arms in front of the drone like she was trying to swat down a UFO. "Ma'am," I said, holding back a laugh, "this is public airspace." She wasn't having it. "Nothing here is public. I own all of it." She whipped out her phone like she was drawing a six-shooter in an old western. "I'm calling the police." And that's when I realized, she just made the worst mistake of her privileged little life. 911. "What's your emergency?" came the dispatcher's voice. "There's a trespasser with some kind of drone equipment. He's harassing homeowners, probably a criminal, or a drug dealer, or both. Send every NEA SWAT, FBI, National Guard." The poor dispatcher must have thought she was reporting a full-on invasion. "Ma'am, What exactly is the emergency? Came the puzzled reply. He's breathing near my property. She shrieked. I glanced at my watch and smiled. It had been a while since I'd felt this entertained. Interesting choice, Mrs. Blackwood, Brittany Blackwood. And you're about to be arrested. She snapped, puffed up with confidence like she'd never been challenged a day in her life. I tilted my head. That name, Blackwood. It rang a bell, something historical. The flicker of uncertainty that passed across her face told me all I needed to know. While she prowled the shoreline like a panicked cat, still muttering about property values and undesirable elements, I simply flew my drone higher, admiring the peaceful lake from 400 feet in the air. Turn that thing off, she demanded. It's just recording the lake, I replied. Beautiful view up here. You're invading my privacy, she screamed. From 400 feet above a public waterway. That's a curious legal claim, Mrs. Blackwood. Then I heard Ida's sirens, and Brittany's face lit up like she'd just won the lottery. Hear that? You're finished. But as those sirens grew louder, I listened more carefully. Different tone as a broken bar, multiple vehicles, a broken bar. Those sirens weren't from the local precinct, that much was clear. I tilted my head, listening carefully. Hear that? I said, half to myself. That doesn't sound like just the local police. That's multiple agencies. Brittany's victorious smirk wavered for the first time. What do you mean, multiple agencies? I calmly secured my documents inside a waterproof folder and met her gaze. Mrs. Blackwood, give it about 8 minutes. A broken bar. Your entire view of ownership is about to get a major update. What happens when someone with government-level protection gets reported to 911 by a person who doesn't know what she's dealing with? Type karma in the comments if you've ever watched someone take on more than they could handle. As the first police cruiser rolled up, Brittany dashed toward it like she was greeting royalty, clipboard held high like she was carrying the Olympic torch. Officers, finally. Thank goodness you're here. Arrest that vagrant immediately. She was practically dancing with anticipation, clearly ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. Officer Danny Silva stepped out with the steady calm of a man who's handled 15 years of calls about everything from noisy dogs to neighbors bickering over fence lines. Ma'am, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened, he asked, trying to make sense of her whirlwind of energy. Brittany didn't hesitate. She launched into her rehearsed speech like she'd been practicing it in front of a mirror for weeks. I was in the middle of my routine HOA duties when this man appeared with military-grade surveillance gear. He's probably scoping out homes for burglary. Or worse, he threatened me. I have witnesses. She flung her arm toward empty air as if a crowd of backup cars were standing behind her. Officer Silva glanced around the deserted lakeside with a raised brow, then turned to me. Sir, could I see some identification? Of course, I replied, handing him the waterproof folder I carry for situations just like this. Silva opened it and his reaction was priceless. His expression shifted like a traffic signal. His eyes widened as he read the first page, then even more as he flipped to the second. Sierra broken bar. This says you're a land guardian under federal protection. In 15 years, I've never seen anything like this. Brittany lunged forward, trying to snatch the documents from his hands. That's fake. Anyone can whip up phony papers. I could go home right now and print something saying I'm the Queen of England. Officer Silva calmly pulled the folder out of her reach. Ma'am, these bear official federal seals, very specific ones. Not something you can just print off your home computer. Then, he spoke into his radio with a tone I'd never heard from a local cop. Dispatch, I need immediate federal consultation. Individual on site has a government protection status I don't recognize. The reply crackled through the radio. Even I could hear the shift in urgency. Copy that, Officer Silva. Federal Unit en route. Do not engage further. I repeat, do not take action until backup arrives. That was the moment Brittany's polished exterior started to crack like a frozen pond in spring. Federal? She stammered. This is local property. I pay local taxes. I vote in local elections. She spun in place, flailing mentally as her world tilted sideways, completely unprepared for this reality. Silva reattached his cuffs to his belt and stepped back from both of us. Ma'am, I recommend you remain calm. This situation is far more complex than a typical property issue. I decided to help him out a bit. Officer, There are more documents in that folder. You may want to check the section with the property deeds. He flipped through a few more pages, and I watched his face turn from concerned to downright intense. Jesus Christ, he muttered under his breath. But Brittany wasn't backing down. She was having none of this federal disruption of her carefully choreographed drama. I don't care what those phony documents say. I know my rights. I'm calling my lawyer and the mayor, maybe even the governor. She whipped out her phone and started dialing like she was summoning the Justice League, flipping the call to speakerphone so we could all bear witness. Gerald, emergency, get down here now. A weary voice came through the speaker. Brittany, what is it this time? There's some vagrant here claiming he's protected by the federal government, with fake documents. It's serious. There was a long silence on Gerald's end, the kind that says everything without saying anything. A broken bar. Brittany, federal protection? If those documents are real, this is way beyond anything I'm qualified to handle. I deal with HOA regulations and property lines, not federal classifications. What do you mean beyond your pay grade? You're my lawyer, she shrieked, her pitch inching toward ultrasonic. Gerald gave a nervous laugh, the kind you hear from someone realizing they've wandered into something way above their clearance level. Brittany, a broken bar. I'm going to hang up now. Call me later after it's sorted out. The line went dead. Brittany stared at the phone in disbelief, like it had just turned its back on her in her moment of need. Did a broken bar? Did my lawyer just hang up on me? She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. I couldn't help but smile. There was something beautifully ironic about it all. Mrs. Blackwood, I said, you could try calling the president if you like, but when federal protection is involved, local authority becomes a broken bar, let's say, limited. The sirens were growing louder by the second. Officer Silva kept checking his radio, clearly aware this was no ordinary call. Dispatch, he asked, how many units are en route to this location? Multiple agencies. Officer Silva, stand by. Maintain distance until federal personnel arrive, the dispatcher replied. And just like that, the cracks in Brittany's tough, commanding facade began to show. Multiple agencies? For one guy? This is ridiculous, she sputtered. I tilted my head, speaking in a calm, almost instructive tone. Mrs. Blackwood, you used words like a terrorism and a drugs during your 911 call. Those are federal trigger terms. They automatically escalate the response. I was just being descriptive, she protested. Descriptive? Yes, a broken bar, but not exactly accurate, I replied. That's when the black SUV pulled in, a low profile, government plates, and an unmistakable air of authority. The kind of vehicle that doesn't show up unless things are about to get very serious, very fast. Out stepped Agent Jake Morrison. He wore a crisp federal badge, a body camera already recording, and an earpiece that told me he'd been fully briefed before even arriving. Brittany's face went ghost white. Why is he recording already? She whispered, eyes wide. I shrugged with a smile. Probably because this isn't the first time he's dealt with land disputes involving people under special protection. Morrison approached with a steady, confident passive, the kind of composure you only have when you're backed by the full weight of the federal government. He gave Officer Silva a nod, then turned his gaze to Brittany like he'd already read her entire biography on the drive over. Mrs. Blackwood, he began, I'm Agent Morrison with Federal Protection Services. We were alerted about possible harassment of a protected citizen. Brittany opened and closed her mouth like a fish pulled out of water, completely unprepared for the gravity of the moment. Protected? He's a vagrant, she blurted out. Morrison's faint smile said this wasn't the first time he'd heard that argument. And here's a thought for an Andromenest viewer. So why do you think a federal agent showed up already recording? Drop your theories in the comments. Agent Morrison looked at Brittany with the kind of diplomatic patience reserved for explaining advanced math to a stubborn student. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, at 10:47 a.m., you made a 911 call accusing Mr. Riverong of trespassing. Unfortunately for you, he is currently on land protected under federal jurisdiction. The way he said unfortunately carried the weight of 100 legal consequences. That's impossible, Brittany snapped, her voice climbing towards screeching. We own this land. We have the paperwork. We pay taxes. I've lived here for 15 years. She flailed her arms like she could physically wave away information she didn't want to accept. Morrison remained composed. Ma'am, once land is designated as federally protected, it cannot be privately owned. This land was never up for illegal sale. Brittany's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and confusion so quickly it looked like her brain was running diagnostics and crashing at every turn. It was like watching someone's entire worldview crack and splinter in real time. I slowly opened my waterproof folder, deliberately, and held out the historical documents that had been in my family for more than 100 years. Mrs. Blackwood, I said evenly, my family has lived here since before your HOA was even formed, before your subdivision existed, before you were born. That's not possible, she gasped, staring at the embossed federal seals like they were some kind of mystical code. You can't just claim land with some old family papers. This is America. We have property rights. Agent Morrison checked something on his tablet. His brow furrowed deeper as he scrolled. Ma'am, these aren't just old documents. These are official federal records still legally recognized. Then he looked up, eyebrows raised. Mr. Riverong, based on what I'm seeing, your status isn't just protected. You're listed as the primary land guardian for a much broader region than we initially assessed. We'll need to re-verify the full boundary range. I couldn't help the grin that crept onto my face. Well, Agent Morrison, I said, I think you'll find those boundaries a broken bar very interesting. Brittany's panic was manifesting physically now, her weight shifting back and forth, as if her body couldn't decide whether to stand her ground or run for the hills. What do you mean, a larger area? She asked, eyes darting between us. Morrison didn't answer immediately. He was typing something into his tablet, and the furrows on his forehead deepened with each passing second. Whatever he was reading was clearly escalating this situation beyond even his expectations. What started as a so-called simple property issue had now escalated into something far more complex. Agent Morrison glanced at his tablet and spoke without lifting his eyes. Our preliminary database scan is showing a large area under federal protection, he said. Then he began explaining things with a calm, precise tone. Though it was obvious Brittany wasn't absorbing any of it, his words were flying over her head like a fighter jet over a chicken coop. Mrs. Blackwood, when land is federally protected, that status overrides all local ownership claims. If your housing development was constructed without the required federal authorization, without clearance, she cut in, voice cracking like a 14-year-old hitting puberty, we got city approval, county approval, and state permits, but not federal clearance, Morrison replied, unshaken, and that is mandatory when it comes to designated heritage land. What she did next was both comical and weirdly satisfying. Brittany yanked out her phone and began aggressively Googling right there in front of us. Federal land protection, a broken bar, heritage sites, a broken bar, indigenous rights, a broken bar. What the hell is all this? She muttered, scrolling like a madwoman. She even pulled out reading glasses, squinting at her screen as if the information would make more sense if she just stared hard enough. Morrison kept a straight face, but I caught the slight tension around his eyes, of the kind that shows when someone realizes they're dealing with a person who's not only unprepared but completely unaware of how far over their head they are. Mrs. Blackwood, Morrison said, if you continue harassing Mr. Riverong, there could be serious legal consequences. I suggest you step aside and let us carry out the investigation. But Brittany wasn't done playing the lead role in her imaginary courtroom drama. No, this is harassment of me. I'm the one being victimized. He's trying to steal our neighborhood using forged federal documents. I glanced back toward the old wooden sign that had been painted over. A swell of emotion caught me off guard. Mrs. Blackwood, I said quietly, my great-grandfather carved that sign back in 1897. Your HOA covered it with paint without our permission. So tell me, who's actually stealing from whom? Right then, Morrison's radio crackled loudly enough to silence everyone on the spot. He stepped aside to take the call, and when he returned, his expression had shifted into something much more serious. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, voice steady, our preliminary investigation suggests there may be irregularities in how your development permits were originally secured. The color drained from Brittany's face like someone had pulled the plug on her entire worldview. Irregularities? She asked, her voice trembling. What kind of irregularities? Morrison consulted his tablet again, scrolling through what looked like a government database deep enough to swallow an entire city council. It appears that the development may have bypassed required federal checks during the approval process, he said. Officer Silva, who'd been silently watching the situation unfold like it was a live documentary, finally stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, "you need to notify your HOA board immediately. This is far beyond anything we can handle at a local level." Brittany looked around at all of us like we'd just told her that gravity was optional and she'd need to learn how to fly. Her comfortable little world of home meetings, real estate bragging rights, and neighborhood dominance was collapsing fast, like a sandcastle getting swallowed by a tidal wave. Morrison's radio chimed again. He stepped aside to answer and returned moments later with a tightened jaw and a new level of seriousness in his tone. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, "based on additional findings, your neighborhood's permits appear to have been obtained under questionable circumstances. We now need to investigate how your HOA was founded and who authorized the initial planning." You could actually see the panic rippling through her. "Founded? What do you mean founded?" she stammered. "It's just a neighborhood. People bought houses. What's there to investigate?" Morrison gave her a long, measured look like a man who had just realized he was standing at the edge of something far bigger than expected. "Ma'am, we'll need full access to all documents relating to the original development, including historical land records, federal consultations, and survey data. This is going to take time." What Brittany didn't yet realize was that this was no longer about just one HOA or a single neighborhood dispute. Morrison's tablet was linked to a federal system that tracked indigenous land claims across the continental U.S. Every document he pulled, every record he examined, was feeding into a massive, ongoing federal investigation, one targeting land theft and development fraud dating back more than 100 years. And then came the kicker: Brittany's own grandfather's name had surfaced in those files, which meant this wasn't just another case anymore. It had become a missing puzzle piece in a federal probe spanning multiple states. The Department of Justice had been building a case for years against systematic land fraud, and thanks to Brittany's 911 call, they'd just uncovered a key thread they'd been searching for. What happens when the federal government discovers your entire community was built on a foundation of deception? Type exposed if you can already tell where this is going. 2 hours later, Brittany had somehow transformed the neighborhood clubhouse into a chaotic war room. It looked like the headquarters of someone deep in breakdown mode. Whiteboards filled with wild diagrams, arrows, maps, and frantic scribbles filled the walls like a low-budget conspiracy movie. Snacks were arranged like they were being prepped for a survival mission. Printed paperwork lay strewn across every surface like a blizzard of bureaucracy. Power cords and chargers were plugged into every outlet like she was trying to launch a satellite. Brittany was in full-blown crisis mode, and it was both impressive and slightly alarming to witness. "Neighbors," she announced to the room packed with anxious homeowners, her voice teetering on the edge of a full-blown breakdown, "we are facing an unprecedented attack on our property rights." She threw blurry phone pictures of me and my drone onto a large screen like she was addressing a military council about an imminent foreign invasion. "This man is trying to rob us of our land using falsified federal paperwork. Our home values are in danger. The American dream is being ripped from us." Her dramatic pitch had the expected effect. The room buzzed with panic and disbelief. People were reacting like they'd just been told their life savings were worthless. Karen Martinez, a working mother who clocked double shifts to make her mortgage payments, was crying openly. "What happens to our mortgages? We poured everything we had into these homes." Bob Thompson, a gruff contractor in the middle of converting his garage into a personal retreat, was pacing furiously. "They can't just take our homes. My kids go to school here." Jennifer Walsh, who seemed to stream every moment of her life, held up her phone and narrated the unfolding disaster to her growing online audience. "Yeah, a broken bar. This is absolutely nuts. The government's saying we might not even legally own our houses." Soccer mom Susan was typing so fast it looked like she was hacking into a mainframe. "If we don't legally own the land, does homeowner insurance still apply? I'm calling my lawyer right now." Mr. Peterson, who had retired here and spent his entire savings on what he thought was his forever home, was gasping in panic. "I'm 70. I can't just start over. I'm calling my realtor immediately." Then, Agent Morrison walked in, calm as ever, with a federal-issued tablet in one hand and legal paperwork in the other. A second agent trailed him, someone who looked like she could lift a car barehanded. The entire room fell into stunned silence. You could hear a pin drop 3 streets away. The air was so heavy with tension, it felt like the walls were closing in. Every homeowner stared, visibly shaken. Bob rose to his feet with barely contained rage, his posture that of a man looking for a fight. "Who the hell are you people? And what gives you the right to show up and ruin our lives?" Jennifer swung her phone toward the agents, her live stream still rolling. "Chat, actual federal agents just crashed our home meeting. You can't make this stuff up." Karen sobbed harder. "We're going to lose everything, aren't we? 20 years of saving a broken bar gone." Susan raised her phone like she was trying to catch a stronger signal. "I'm recording this. My lawyer is going to see every second." Morrison calmly hooked his tablet up to the room's television. In an instant, the big screen filled with a government interface none of them had seen before. Cold, official, and damning. Across the top, in glaring red letters, Emerald Ridge Development and no authorization found. Below that, federal clearance missing. And at the bottom, flashing like a warning beacon, protected land violated. The room exploded. People began shouting over each other. Phones rang. Someone was weeping in the corner. At least 3 homeowners were on the phone with legal counsel. All at once, Morrison raised his voice just enough to slice through the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, early findings indicate that this development was constructed without the mandatory federal clearance for protected heritage territory." Jennifer's live stream was going viral by the second. I glanced over and saw the view counter skyrocketing. Thousands were tuning in to witness a suburban HOA collapse under federal scrutiny. Her comment section was a fast-moving blur. "Karen community about to get wrecked. This is better than Netflix." But the real drama was happening right there, in that room, as Brittany tried to hang on to control while her entire neighborhood was turning against her. Bob pointed a trembling, furious finger right at her. "Brittany, what did your family do to us?" Jennifer turned her camera again. "Chat a broken bar. Look at Karen. She's absolutely losing her mind right now." Karen Martinez, through tears, was demanding answers. How did this even happen? Who approved the HOA without proper checks? Who is supposed to look into this? Susan was on a second phone call, now shouting into her speaker, "I'm suing every Enya city, county, HOA, developer. All of them." Mr. Peterson looked pale and shaken, clutching his chest like he was processing betrayal more than shock. "I trusted you, Brittany, with my entire retirement. How could you not know?" And Brittany, trying desperately to hold on to her authority, was now shouting over the noise, face red, eyes wild. "Don't film me. This is a private meeting. Turn off those cameras." But Jennifer didn't even blink. Her stream was still live, and Brittany's breakdown was now trending. Jennifer kept the live stream going, and now nearly half the room had their phones out, filming the chaos. "Chat," she said, breathless with excitement. "This is the most dramatic thing that's ever happened in our neighborhood." Morrison allowed the hysteria to build for a few more moments before calmly raising his hand. The room slowly quieted, though tension still crackled in the air. "Our early investigation suggests your HOA was created by deliberately concealing existing federal protections," he announced. "We're now reviewing documents dating back to the 1950s to uncover how this was allowed to proceed unchecked." Another heavy silence swept through the room. It was the uneasy stillness that comes right before everything collapses. "Mrs. Blackwood," Morrison said as he reviewed his tablet again, "while examining preliminary permit records, we came across several historical documents signed by a man named Harold Sterling. Is there any relation?" I watched Brittany's complexion drain faster than a leaking faucet. She stammered, "That's a broken bar. That's my grandfather." Now you could hear every breath in the room. Her voice trembled with the weight of unwanted truth. Meanwhile, Jennifer's live chat was lighting up with reactions. Generational karma hitting hard, and a drama-nest episode just dropped. The sins of the family always circle back. Morrison tapped a note onto his tablet. It was a simple action, but the meaning behind it landed like a hammer. What struck me most was seeing 40 adults come to the chilling realization that everything they thought they knew about property law was crumbling. These weren't naive people, these were educated professionals who had lawyers, read contracts, follow due process, and still, not one of them had ever heard of federal heritage protections or indigenous land rights. The system had failed them so thoroughly that they were genuinely stunned to learn that land could legally belong to someone else long before their mortgage paperwork ever existed. "We're going to need to discuss your grandfather's involvement in certain land transactions," Morrison added. Privately, how deep does a family's buried truth go when the government's been watching for decades? Anna Dramanest Familia, what's your prediction about what Harold Sterling did next? The following morning, a woman arrived at the clubhouse carrying a wooden box that looked older than anything in the building. Her name was Mary Red Cloud, 75 years old, with a commanding grace that instantly commanded respect, the kind of person who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. She moved slowly, supported by a younger tribal member who handled her with the care one might offer a national treasure. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the strength of generations. "I heard Harold Sterling's granddaughter is finally ready to face the truth." Brittany immediately stiffened, already on the defensive. "Who are you?" "This is a private home meeting." Mary simply smiled, a knowing, calm expression that said she already knew how this would end. "Child," she replied, "I'm Mary Red Cloud, and I've waited 70 years to hand these documents to Harold Sterling's family." Agent Morrison stood out of respect. "Elder Red Cloud, thank you for being here. Your historical tribal records are invaluable to this federal investigation." Mary nodded and began opening the wooden box with deliberate care, as if she were unsealing sacred history. Inside were dozens of black and white photographs from the 1950s, silent witnesses to a truth that had never made it into textbooks. The first photo showed Cherokee families being forced out of their home, children crying, parents clutching belongings, and federal officers standing by like statues. The next photo captured homes being bulldozed, with displaced families watching from a distance, holding one another as their lives were flattened by machines. But the third photo silenced the room completely. A man in a government uniform, cold and composed, stood overseeing the entire operation. It was a man who'd clearly done this before. "That's not possible," Brittany shouted, her voice cracking. "My grandfather was a war hero. He served with honor." Mary looked at her with the sorrowful patience of someone explaining reality to a child who still believed in fairy tales. "No, child, your grandfather served his interests and his wallet. He took our land and called it patriotism." Brittany wasn't ready to let go of the myths she'd been raised on. "These could be fake. Anyone can stage old photos. You're just trying to scam us." Without a word, Mary reached into the box again and pulled out something that made the room lean in: a Harold Sterling's personal diary. The cover was worn and creased, the leather softened by decades of handling. "Read it for yourself," she said. His words, his thoughts, his confession. She opened to a marked page and began reading aloud, her voice smooth, steady, and sharp enough to pierce denial. "June 15, 1952. Cleared another Cherokee family today. Told them the government was relocating them for their own good. These people broken bar. They're so trusting it's honestly hard to watch." Morrison read aloud, "Easy profits for the developers. Johnson thinks we can clear the entire area by Christmas if we stay on schedule." I watched Brittany unravel in real time. Whatever the clinical term is for watching someone's identity collapse, it was happening right in front of us. First came denial, loud and indignant. "This is a lie. You're just trying to ruin my family's name." Then came rage, burning and wild. "Even if this did happen, it has nothing to do with me. I wasn't even born yet." Then came bargaining, her voice softening into near pleading. "If it's true a broken bar, we can fix this. Maybe we can pay restitution, work something out." Then depression set in as she dropped heavily into her seat, her eyes locked on the photographs as though trying to read a foreign language for the first time. And finally, the first tremors of acceptance, though she hadn't fully arrived. "A broken bar. I just need some time to process all of this." Mary, calm and composed, continued to reveal item after item from her box. She had been waiting her entire life for this moment, and her movements carried that weight. Deeds of forced property sales, all bearing Harold Sterling's signature. Government memos referencing removal of undesirable residents in the name of civic progress. Photographs showing once thriving Cherokee homes flattened and cleared to make way for suburban sprawl. Letters between Harold and developers read like step-by-step guides to cultural erasure. Then I saw a photo that hit me like a punch to the chest of my great-grandmother, being forced out of our ancestral cabin. She clutched a battered old guitar that had been passed down for generations. Her face met the camera, fierce and unwavering, radiating dignity in the face of devastation. "Grandmother, a broken bar," I whispered, my fingertips grazing the edge of the photo. "Now they'll finally know." Mary glanced over and nodded softly. "She carved that family sign the day they came for her," she said. "Told my mother, let them know we were here." Even when they tried to erase us, I turned my eyes toward the old family cabin, suddenly understanding why that wooden sign had always meant so much to us. "Mrs. Blackwood," Mary continued, her tone gentle but firm, "your grandfather didn't just steal land, he designed an entire system to erase Cherokee ownership from every official record. He was meticulous," she added, proud of how efficient he was. Agent Morrison was photographing everything, building a federal case that had been waiting to happen for over 70 years. He looked up from his notes. "Mrs. Blackwood, our findings show that Judge Sterling, your father, has carried on your grandfather's legacy. The suppression of indigenous land claims has been a coordinated effort across generations." Brittany stared at the evidence spread across the table as though the pieces of her life no longer fit together. "My college tuition, a broken bar, our house, a broken bar, all the money for the development project, a broken bar." Her voice trailed off. Mary finished the thought with quiet finality. 70 years of stolen wealth, built on the backs of families who were displaced, silenced, and erased. The weight of that truth settled over the room like ash after a fire. Brittany's eyes filled as the full scope of her family's inheritance sank in, and not just the money, but the lives shattered along the way, the homes destroyed, the stories never told. Mary gently touched a photo of a young girl. "This one," she said softly, "was probably your age when they dragged her out of her home. She never got to go to college, never owned a house, never passed on her people's story as a broken bar because she was forbidden to speak her language." Brittany's hands trembled. Meanwhile, some neighbors were still glued to Jennifer's live stream. Her audience had ballooned, and the chat was now flooded with comments reacting to the devastating truths unfolding. People from across the country were now witnessing what had started as a quiet HOA dispute had transformed into something much bigger. Then Morrison's radio crackled to life again. He listened for a moment, and when he ended the call, his expression turned cold and sharp. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said gravely, "Judge Sterling just attempted to destroy federal evidence. FBI agents are at his courthouse office executing a warrant as we speak." A hush fell over the room, followed by gasps. "When a judge destroys evidence, what is he hiding?" Type busted Indiana Drama Nest chat if you think you know what's coming next. By the time the news vans rolled in, our sleepy little community had become the front page of a national crisis. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Reporters jostled for space on sidewalks and medians. Protesters appeared out of nowhere, holding handmade signs that read, "Justice for Stolen Land." And Brittany? She was still inside the clubhouse, trapped, not by paparazzi, but by truth, camera crews, and decades of stolen history finally breaking loose. Agent Morrison called the room to attention once again. A broken bar. Agent Morrison gathered everyone inside the clubhouse for what he called the final disclosure of findings. His expression alone told us whatever he was about to say would make everything before it feel like a mere prelude. According to 1897 federal records and every legal protection that followed, he announced, "Alex Riverong is the rightful legal owner and steward of this entire 200-acre land." The silence was so thick I could hear my own breathing. Jennifer whispered to her stream viewers, "Chat, a broken bar, did he just say what I think he said?" And just like that, it hit everyone in the room all at once, like a freight train loaded with long overdue justice. Every single home in Emerald Ridge was illegally constructed on land belonging to Mr. Riverong's family. Morrison calmly scrolled through his tablet, like someone who dropped life-shattering revelations every day before breakfast. "Residents here have unknowingly lived on unlawfully seized property for the last 15 years, he stated. "Around me, I watched dozens of homeowners cycle through denial, shock, grief, as some looked like they might actually faint. It felt like a psychological case study unfolding in real time. But the real spectacle was outside the glass, where cameras captured Britney's breakdown in full HD for all the world to witness. She was pounding on the clubhouse window, screaming at the reporters, "Turn those cameras off, this is harassment, I'm the victim here." But the glass muffled her voice. From the outside, it just looked like she was acting out a dramatic interpretive piece about suburban rage and entitlement. Jennifer's stream had now gone fully viral. Over 50,000 live viewers were tuned in, and the comments were flying by so fast, they looked like fireworks. Reactions poured in. Karen got government slapped. This is the most satisfying karma arc I've ever seen. Hashtags were already trending. #Ukraine, #stolen land, #federal justice, #karma is real. That was my cue. "Mrs. Blackwood," I began, turning to her calmly, "every threatening letter your host sent me, broken bar every bogus fine, a broken bar every so-called property violation, I saved it all. Not because I was scared, but because federal law requires a record of consistent harassment before they'll act." Britney's face twisted as realization dawned. "You a broken bar, you planned this," she whispered, her voice barely holding itself together. "I planned to defend what's rightfully mine," I answered. "Your family? They planned to keep what they stole. One of us followed the law." That's when her phone rang at possibly the worst moment imaginable. The caller ID flashed. Judge Sterling. And in her stunned state, she answered it on speaker. Right there, in front of federal agents, over 40 witnesses, and tens of thousands of live viewers. "Britney," came the panicked voice of Judge Sterling through the speaker. "The FBI raided my office. They've got everything of the land records, the payoffs, the cover-ups. 70 years of evidence." Morrison stepped forward like someone unwrapping the best Christmas gift he'd ever received. "Judge Sterling," he said formally, "this is Agent Morrison with Federal Protection Services. This call is being recorded for federal investigation." But the judge didn't care. Panic had taken full control. He kept speaking, oblivious to the trap he'd just fallen into. "Britney, deny everything. Say you didn't know anything about your grandfather's tactics. Destroy the records. Burn anything with Harold's name on it. Lawyer up and blame someone else." Yeah. Click. The line cut off, presumably because the FBI had just finished placing him under arrest. Britney's phone buzzed again, and notifications blowing up like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. Karen Martinez held up her phone and gasped, "Britney, a broken bar, you're trending." #Ukraine gets owned. BIFB had over 2 million views. The entire world was watching this unfold like it was their new favorite binge-worthy drama. Neighbors who had stood by Britney just hours earlier now looked at her like she had brought a plague into their lives. Bob Thompson shook his head, disgusted. "Your whole family's crooked." 70 years of robbing people. Jennifer, still streaming, narrated for her viewers. Chat, her judge uncle just got arrested. Live, "I'm not kidding. This is better than Netflix." Soccer mom Susan furiously tapped on her phone. "I'm suing the Blackwoods for every cent they made off our stolen land." Old Mr. Peterson was just repeating the same stunned phrase. 70 years of lies. 70 years. But I wasn't finished yet. I walked over to the old wooden chest, the one that had sat in our family cabin since my great-grandfather's time, and opened it, revealing preserved duplicates of every document Judge Sterling had just tried to erase. "Mrs. Blackwood," I said, "my great-grandfather once told us something important. A government man will always try to bury the truth, so hide the originals where they'll never look." I laid out the 1897 land grant across the table, along with the federal protection papers and decades of correspondence between my family and the U.S. government, a proof of our hereditary right to oversee this entire area. It declared us primary guardians of the Cherokee Heritage Preserve, 200 acres that included every square foot of her so-called development. Agent Morrison, reviewing the records, gave a solemn nod. "Mr. Riversong, the federal government officially recognizes your hereditary custodianship. Any development here required your direct consent, which was never granted." The justice of it all felt almost poetic. The very woman who tried to have me arrested for trespassing had, in fact, been living illegally on my family's land for over a decade. But beyond the irony was something much more powerful: a legal impact. Every document Morrison photographed, every sworn statement, and all the collected evidence would now serve as the foundation for a federal precedent. It meant future indigenous families, fighting similar land disputes, could look to our outcome and say, this is the path forward. The ripple effects of this legal framework would stretch across generations. Outside, crowds chanted justice for stolen land, and reporters clamored for answers. Meanwhile, Brittany stood isolated, both physically and legally entrenched in the aftermath of her family's 70-year legacy of deceit and theft. How does it feel when your entire world collapses while the internet watches it happen in real time? Anadroma-nest viewersa comment below, does Brittany deserve what's coming? 6 months later, I'm sipping coffee on the porch of my family's cabin, watching the sunrise reflect on the same lake my great-grandfather once looked out over when he built this place in 1897. The landscape hasn't changed much, but everything else has shifted more profoundly than I ever imagined when all this began: a broken bar with a vandalized family sign and a woman who believed she ruled the world. Judge Sterling's arrest made headlines across the country. There's something immensely satisfying about watching a crooked judge get hauled away in cuffs while trying to hide half a sandwich in his briefcase. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for orchestrating systematic land fraud and violating the civil rights of indigenous people across 3 counties. The FBI's investigation found that he had carried on his grandfather Harold's corruption for decades, as blocking indigenous land claims and accepting bribes from developers looking to build on protected land. All of his assets were frozen. The scandal pulled back the curtain on a web of corruption dating back 70 years. Since then, our community has undergone an incredible transformation. Those new signs reading Cherokee protected land have replaced Brittany's old private property warnings, but they're more than just boundary markers. They've become tools for education, telling the truth about this land's history. Now, every resident is required to attend monthly community history sessions, and they've done more to bring people together than all of Brittany's home meetings ever did. Local kids use our heritage trail for school projects. And for the first time since the 1950s, Cherokee families have begun returning to live here again. As for Brittany, her personal saga has been complicated. She was forced to resign from her whole leadership role in public disgrace. Watching her rebuild her life has been like witnessing someone learning to walk after 48 years of believing they could fly. She now attends Cherokee cultural education classes, though her questions often make the room go quiet. Just last week, she asked the instructor, "But why can't we just move on?" This happened, like, 70 years ago. The teacher spent 20 minutes patiently explaining generational trauma. Brittany, however, looked visibly puzzled, as struggling with ideas that didn't fit into her comfortable suburban lens. In the community, her reputation is beyond repair. Former home members avoid her entirely, some even cross the street to steer clear. Social media groups still post memes about the time Brittany thought she owned Alex's land. She's been shopping at a grocery store 3 towns over just to avoid the constant recognition from her viral downfall. The neighborhood kids call her FBI Karen now, and the name stuck so well that even our mail carrier uses it. As for me, I've stepped into a new role. I now work as a federal heritage protection consultant, supporting indigenous communities nationwide in safeguarding their ancestral lands from illegal development and systemic abuse. My cabin has a small office outfitted with federal communications gear, and I spend much of my time traveling to reservations, historic sites, and family homes, helping others navigate battles just like the one we won. Our family's win here has become something greater than just a personal victory. It's incredibly fulfilling to know that what we accomplished is now setting a precedent for others fighting to protect their heritage. But the real sign of change came just last week, when a new potential Karen appeared on the heritage trail. Picture it: blonde hair, BMW SUV, head-to-toe design, clothes, and that unmistakable aura of entitlement that only seems to grow in people who've never heard the word number. She stomped right up to me while I was checking the trail markers and declared, "Excuse me, this is private property. You can't just walk here. I'm calling 911. I glanced up from my work and calmly said, "Ma'am, I'd think twice about that." but she was already pulling out her phone armed with the same kind of misguided boldness Brittany had 6 months earlier. "Don't tell me what to do. I know my rights," she snapped. "Some people, clearly, don't learn from others' mistakes." She dialed with theatrical flair, clearly imagining herself the lead in some courtroom drama. The dispatcher's voice came through crisply. "Emergency services." "What's your location?" she replied. "I'm at the Lakeside Trail near Emerald Ridge. There's a man trespassing on private land." But this time, the response was nothing like what Brittany had once received. "Ma'am," the dispatcher said, "I need to verify whether this location is federally protected. Please hold." There was a brief pause, 10 seconds of silence, yet just long enough for confusion to creep across the woman's face. Then the dispatcher returned. "Ma'am, you're calling from federally recognized Cherokee protected land. Harassment of protected individuals has serious legal implications. I strongly advise you to end this interaction immediately. Have a good day." The line went dead. The woman stood there, staring at her phone like it had just spoken in alien code. Slowly, she looked up at me, realizing this wasn't just some neighborhood spat. This was much bigger. Across the trail, I spotted Brittany walking her dog. Part of her court-ordered community service includes maintaining the same heritage trail she once tried to shut down. It was all a part of a sweeping settlement that had stripped her family of most of their inherited fortune. But the compensation fund she established, that wasn't just a gesture, it's now supporting Cherokee language revival efforts, land conservation programs, and education grants for Native students across 3 states. She'd witnessed the entire exchange, and as she walked over, there was a strange mix of understanding and genuine concern in her expression. "She has no idea how lucky she is," Brittany said softly. "I went viral for 3 months, got social media death threats, and I'm still drowning in legal bills." I glanced at the new Karen, who was now quietly backing away toward her BMW like someone fleeing a crime scene. "Yeah," I said. "She's lucky the system works now. And lucky I'm not live streaming this." That made Brittany laugh, an honest laugh, the kind that comes from learning very expensive lessons. "Please don't," she said. "I'm still getting weird DMs from people who saw those videos." The woman sped off in her SUV, probably already Googling what is Cherokee protected land. Before she even hit the main road, I turned back to Brittany. We both stood there silently, watching the water, a pair of former adversaries who'd both been forever changed by the battle we went through. "Alex," she finally said, "I know I can never undo what my family did, a broken bar, but I'm trying to grow from it." I looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who was honestly struggling to do better, as someone learning to confront painful truths about her past, her beliefs, and her privilege. "Maybe that's enough," I said. "Maybe learning is how we keep history from repeating itself." Justice might take 70 years to show up, but when it does, it often brings reinforcements. In this case, it brought the law, the internet, and the truth all showing up at the same time. And honestly, the results were more satisfying than I ever expected. Here's the takeaway. Never underestimate someone just because they seem calm or quiet. You never know what kind of power is protecting them. Brittany learned that the hard way when her 911 call triggered laws she didn't even know existed. If this full circle moment of karma hit you in just the right spot, tap that like button. This is Anadramanest, where every ending proves that what goes around truly comes back around. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next episode, where justice always finds its way. Or does it? Because here at Anadramanest, there's always one last plot twist waiting behind the next click.